Hello, my name is Angeli Jane Figueroa. I'm Associate Director at Green Info Network. Green Info Network is a nonprofit that specializes in mapping, data visualization, and communication of information in the public interest. We also manage the California Protected Areas Database, or CPAD, and today I'll be discussing how we incorporated gap codes, which reflect management intent for biodiversity, into CPAD. So let me start first with what is CPAD. California Protected Areas Database is a data source. Really, it's more of a data collection effort that's been ongoing for over a decade and now has stable funding from agencies like the California Natural Resources Agency. It started as a bottom-up approach where agencies send us information in their favorite format: PDF, shapefile, emails, even anonymous tips. And we serve as a centralized data cleansing and clearinghouse. We standardize, reformat, organize, and follow up with agencies to keep the database. The structure is one around land ownership and management. And CPAD includes 15,000 parks and 49 million acres of California's 100 million acres. CPAD has had wide and diverse uses, from administering grants for recreational funding, identifying locations for parks to enhance equity, land and water conservation planning, and accessibility and siting, as well as climate adaptation and mitigation. And now there's a new potential use in the 30 by 30 initiative. 30 by 30 is the nickname for the state and parallel federal effort to conserve at least 30% of land and coastal waters by 2030. It's a midpoint for 50-50. Definitions of conserving, protecting, and biodiversity are still being determined, but with a numeric target, it encourages a debate. For example, a naive approach for CPAD would be to say that 49 million acres are included in the California Protected Areas Database, and so 49% of California is protected. Although the definitions for conserve, protect, and biodiversity in 30 by 30 are still being debated, we can be pretty clear about what protected means in CPAD. CPAD really refers to fee title ownership for open spaces, and this includes recreation, and there is no specified level of conservation for biodiversity. So in order to make this data source useful for 30 by 30, we would have to include items that refer to some of the goals of 30 by 30, biodiversity, equity, including tribal nations, a variety of aspects that could be included. So the question is, can we include information about management for biodiversity? We think yes, especially through USGS's system of gap status codes. USGS has a national protected areas database, and gap codes serve as an indicator on a scale of 1 to 4 about the management intent for the land. A gap code of 1 means that that land is managed for biodiversity and natural land is intended to not change. That means that disturbance events proceed or are mimicked. Gap code of 2 is also managed for biodiversity, but here disturbance events are suppressed. And it also means that the natural management can lead to degradation of the land. A gap code of 3, it has multiple uses. It doesn't have a mandate for biodiversity and can be subject to recreation and extraction. And a gap code of 4 means that the land has no mandate or no known mandate for biodiversity or land conversion. Incorporating the gap codes into CPAD poses a GIS challenge. The gap codes and designations do not conform to the CPAD ownership structure. This means we end up with lots of overlaps, data that's crossing private lands, they're named separately from their governing units, and there's really no one-to-one matching between designations. These are things like wilderness areas, national park, national monument, to gap code 1, 2, 3, or 4. We actually attempted prior a special one-time effort to try to map designations to gap. And in this effort, we preferred federal designations above all others. However, doing this implied a lot of maintenance work, and we were guessing at the designations. So now we want a new approach, and it's actually going back to our old approach, where local agencies give us the information and we try to incorporate it. The method is really 2 steps. Top down, leveraging the federal gap work that already exists on federal land, given that a lot of California CPAD includes federal land. And then bottom up, encouraging local assignment of gap codes. The PAD US layers include designations, easements, fee proclamations, And in each one of these layers, you can have gap codes 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is what leads to the overlaps. First, we extract the gap codes by 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we intersect those with CPAD holdings. Of course, what we want is a flattened layer, so we have to select which of those gap codes is associated with that holding. And finally, we want to include our bottom-up approach, where we override data with local data. We believe the local data, especially for state and local parks, will have better information as to the management intent. So here's an example of flattening. In the Mojave National Preserve, we could see data for this holding unit that includes gap 1, gap 2, gap 3, and no gap 4. But what do we assign the holding unit? One approach would be to assign the one that is the majority of that area. But we've opted for a different approach to try to give the distribution. And the reason for this is that with 30 by 30, the accounting becomes pretty important. And so having accuracy in the numerical values is more important than necessarily the spatial distribution. So we flatten by associating the holding with the most stringent gap code, but we do allow for multiple gap codes within the holding. Second, we do our bottom-up approach. We get local assignments. We started with the California Departments of Parks and Recreation. And if you're wondering why include the local management, it's because at the local level, we can really start moving towards one of the goals of 30 by 30, which is connecting people to nature. And local agencies know best if biodiversity is being protected in their management. What this results in is that this is a table view where in CPAD we have our spatial unit of the holding, and we've added 4 columns that have the acreage within that holding that's assigned to a particular gap code. This is aspatial, but allows for numerical accuracy. The rounding helps us resolve slivers with little manual effort, which was a big learning from our previous effort. And the rounding also aims to ensure that the gap acreage does not exceed the holding acreage. This is what the visual would look like. For CPAD, once intersected, we can see, instead of an acreage basis here, we've put it as a percentage of the holding. For each holding, what amount of that land or what the distribution within that holding is across gap 1, gap 2, gap 3, and gap 4. To make this more concrete, let's zoom in into one area. This is the Sierra National Forest example. This is actually a CPAD super unit. A super unit is composed of several holdings, in this case, 2 holdings, one in Madera and one in Fresno. And what you can see is we're showing the gap distribution by holding. So within a super unit, we can have different percentages. But in our table view at the super unit level, we can also have the percentage of the super unit that is gap 1 and that is gap 3. Or more important for accounting, the actual acreage relative to the total acreage of the Sierra National Forest. This starts telling us what the management intent is in different areas of this super unit. We're also then able to start summarizing some of the information. Here we've focused on the largest, the agencies that manage more than 1 million CPAD acres. And we can see these include the U.S. Forestry Service, Bureau of Land Management, MPS, and the California Department of Parks and Recreation. You can see that these make up also the majority of our gap 1s, where California Department of Fish and Wildlife and many NGOs are managing land at the level of gap 2. This type of summary can also be done regionally. And what it starts getting at is the intent for which that land is managed for biodiversity purposes, where gap 1 and gap 2 can be said to have a type of management that protects biodiversity. And it allows us to see how much effort or what lands could be converted to that if we want to enhance biodiversity. The takeaway is really that incorporating gap codes to provide information on management intent, specifically for biodiversity, is a new improvement, and it's spurred in part by the opportunity that 30 by 30 presents. The way we've attempted to incorporate it really focuses on the on an accounting accuracy, so making sure the acreage is correct without necessarily showing all the spatial information, only the distribution within a holding. This has the added advantage that it requires less maintenance, where rounding of the numbers is taking care of a lot of the slivers and gaps. Much of this is still in development, and your thoughts and input are appreciated. And I leave you with a call to action, especially to local land managers, to send us your gap assignments along with all your CPAD edits. Thank you.